but that's just one example. We have many examples that we're on the forefront of being able to predict with tremendous accuracy what's going to happen in the future. And think about these are events which haven't occurred yet.
Welcome to the My Future Business Show, where we get you in front of your best audience and keep you there. Not only are we interviewing the biggest names in business to help you become even more successful, we're inviting you to book your spot on the show to help you grow your business. So at the end of the call, make sure you fill in the interview application form at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the My Future Business Show. I'm on the line with Rebecca Costa. Now, Rebecca's a sociobiologist. I had to work on that one. And she's also a futurist. She has some critical acclaim from Sir Richard Branson in one of her books. She has some high praise from leading political figures. And today we're going to be talking about adaptation, AI, a whole host of wonderful things. I'm very, very excited about this call. Welcome to the show, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's absolutely my pleasure. I've been reading through your bio and I was just blown away with some of the work that you've done with leading organizations. You know, you're in Silicon Valley. We're talking the Apples, the Hewlett-Packards, Oracles, Siebel Systems, General Electric, 3M. The list goes on and on and on. I guess one of the best parts to start with is your background, where you are, and how it was that you came to be what you're doing today.
Well, to be perfectly honest, by accident. Like a lot of people's careers, certain things enter into your life serendipitously.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have the education and the determination, then you have the ability to capitalize on those events. And certainly that is the case for my career. My parents happened to fall in love with an area that no one knew was later to become Silicon Valley. So of course, once I graduated from college, I did what most college students do. I returned home. And the only jobs that were available at the time, this was the late 70s, early 80s,
mm-hmm.
were technology jobs. And I came back with a degree in biology and sociology. They didn't have degrees in sociobiology at the time. It was a new field, and they didn't have hybrid degrees like they do now.
Yes.
And I was fortunate to get a job with a company that was purchased by United Telecom and then General Electric. And at that time, there was such a shortage of labor that if you were really willing to put in the hours and learn the nuts and bolts of the technology, everything from semiconductors to CAD/CAM to enterprise network systems, this was a time like no other in history. And I could not wait. Being a scientist by training, I couldn't wait to dive into it. So I spent most of my career in Silicon Valley, and when I got good and ready, formed my own company, which was a technology consulting company. And I wound up being able to work with people who, at the time, I really need to make this clear, we didn't know they'd become legends. They were just hardworking blokes like everyone else.
Yes.
You know, we rolled our shirt sleeves up and we ate pizza at 2 a.m., on the company grounds, and we were all just working. And so I never think of Steve Jobs or Wozniak or Larry Ellison or any of the other pioneers that I had the good fortune to work with.
Mm-hmm.
I never think of them as anything other than coworkers because they didn't act as though they were executives or founders. David Packard, as you may know, had a cubicle on the main engineering floor his entire career.
Yes. And you're based in Oregon, aren't you?
I am. I recently moved to my second home here on the Oregon coast in order to, be able to quasi-retire. It's not really working out that way. I'm still traveling all over the world. And, there's a lot of interest in really where is all this technology headed?
Mm-hmm.
And people are a bit overwhelmed by the deluge of new methodologies and new techniques and new data that's shaping our world. And so, there's no shortage of demand for a futurist.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. That's wonderful. I wonder, the first thing that popped into my mind is mindset about what's happening in our world and the pace at which it's happening. I don't like to necessarily talk about the negatives and the positives, just some of the functional elements that you have seen that you see as positive for our world moving forward. Could you share a little bit about your views on that?
Well, when you look at data sets, the bigger the data sets the more accurate the algorithms and the patterns become, right? We have more points. You have, as everybody knows, 2 points makes a line, and 3 points, you're starting to look at a trend, right? But imagine instead of 1, 2, or 3 points, you have billions and billions of points that are indicating what a future event might be or a future outcome. So to take that out of technical terms, many times if I tell people I can predict with an 85 to 90% accuracy rate whether you're going to trip and fall and hurt yourself in the next 3 weeks, they look at me like I've been smoking something funny. There's no possibility that you can predict someone's going to trip and fall. But it turns out that because our data sets have now become so massive, we now have discovered that if there's a 3 to 5 centimeter change in your normal walking gait, which is indiscernible by the human eye,
Mm-hmm.
you have about an 85 to 90% probability of tripping and falling and injuring yourself. So now you start to think, well, what does that mean? Well, obviously they're working on a Fitbit-like device for your ankle. And imagine what this means for the elderly who often lose their ability to live independently once they take a fall. That kind of becomes the precursor to going into assisted living, and then you eventually need care. And it's determined that economists have basically determined that this may allow people to put off requiring any kind of assistance in their elder years by anywhere from 3 to 5 years. And that's a really huge impact from just being able to connect the dots that are related to tripping and falling. But that's just one example. We have many examples that we're on the forefront of being able to predict with tremendous accuracy what's going to happen in the future. And think about this. These are events which haven't occurred yet.
Yeah, this is mind. This is mind-blowing stuff, because if you stop and think about the capabilities and the potential for this technology, one of the things that popped into my mind, Rebecca, is the restrictions on the abilities of the computers that we use to process these incredible algorithmic equations. Are we limited by the processing power that we have in the future? Where will it stop in terms of our ability to calculate these things, or is it just an endless possibility here?
It won't stop. It won't stop because we haven't even gotten to quantum computing yet.
Yeah.
We're still in the era of classical computing,
Mm-hmm.
and quantum computing, without getting into lots of science, is based on the fact that an atom can exist in more than one state at the same time. So there's a massive leap in computing power when we go from classical computing, which is pretty fast and overwhelming us already today,
Mm-hmm.
into quantum computing. And I would say we'll make that shift in the next decade.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible stuff. I'd love to talk a little
Yeah,
bit.
I think there's no end. There's really no end to it. The limiting factor will be how fast humans can adapt to those changes.
And this is a big part of what you talk about in, I guess, some of your books and all of your work. Let's talk about a few of the other examples of this. You're talking about in your bio the potential to prevent opioid addiction, mass shootings, which is obviously front and center in lots of people's minds at the moment, recessions, and so on. What is the actual approach here? Do you just punch in a whole series of numbers, or is just something that is just being compiled by a mega computer somewhere right now? How is this all happening?
Well, the data sets exist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm often asked about mass shootings, and I tell people the problem is not whether we can identify the people who are potential uh, mass shooting perpetrators.
Mm-hmm.
That isn't the problem. Stephen Paddock, for example, who was the Las Vegas shooter who shot into a concert-going crowd.
Mm-hmm.
His father was a dangerous and violent sociopath, and we now know through genetic sciences that's a heritable quality. We also know that a doctor who should never have done this prescribed diazepam to him about 3 to 4 months before he engaged in this mass slaughter.
Mm-hmm.
And that you do not prescribe diazepam to someone who has a family history
Right.
of violence and sociopath pathology. But we also know that he sent his fiancee away to another country and transferred $100,000 to her ahead of time and said, don't come back to the United States. He moved 26 times. He started accelerating the purchases of guns. He was trying to buy tracer rounds, which are more accurate for evening shooting.
Mm-hmm.
There were hundreds and hundreds of markers,
Yes.
which indicated that Stephen Paddock was reaching criticality. But that's not the problem. The problem isn't whether we can identify a person is reaching criticality and is becoming potentially dangerous. The problem is he could have checked into that room, loaded his weapon, broken the glass of the window, pointed it at the concert goers, and changed his mind and decided, I'm not going to go through with this, and then unloaded his gun, packed it, and gone home. So unless we want a world that's similar to that movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise in it, where they had the cognition police, they descended upon you because the predictive algorithms got so accurate that it was 100% foolproof that you were going to commit the crime. And so these police would drop out of the air and capture you 1 second before you were going to commit the crime so that there would be no victim. But that was enough to sentence and put you in jail. We don't live that wasn't a documentary. It was allegedly science fiction, but we do live in a time where our laws and our social systems don't really accommodate before the fact. They're really designed for after you commit the crime.
Yes.
We know what to do. We have a legal system for that, for after you commit the crime. And then let me take that one step further. Mm-hmm. In the United States, there are several states that have now made their own legislatures have mandated that the judges use predictive algorithm data sets to determine sentencing.
Wow.
Now, this is really interesting. It hasn't hit the radar. You may be the first podcast to even talk about this because my eyes are wide open on this, and I'm saying, wow, we've got states that are saying, let's take the bias, right, out of sentencing and whether someone can be detained before they've been tried. And we want to now use these group data sets to apply to individuals. And it doesn't always work. We have a thing called ecology fallacy, which is basically that you could take all the statistics in the world, but that doesn't mean it applies to an individual circumstance. Mm-hmm. And yet states are quietly beginning to rely on these algorithms to inform the judge as to whether someone is a flight risk, whether they have a high likelihood of recidivism. And this is all going on in the background.
As we live and breathe, it's just omnipresent, isn't it? I wonder, Rebecca, excuse me, we capture all of this data. We have these algorithms. They're driven by machines that were made by men, presumably. What happens if we happen to lose our social structure and all of that information goes away? How do we deal with this then? Do we go back to square one and we just rebuild? Is there any consideration about the loss of infrastructure in a I guess a social setting that collapses? How would that all work out?
Well, there is no scenario under which we'd lose all the data.
Right. Yeah,
It's an impossible scenario.
right. It's
Yeah. So
just one of those things I think about. You talk about this the end of the world sort of scenario coming to pass, and it was just an interesting thought that I had.
you mean like a Mad Max anarchy?
Yeah, no, like the end of society as we know it. Somebody drops a bomb, and then we have to start again. And I suspect that we would have major
Well, it has
infrastructure.
happened. I mean, to your point, uh, the collapse of the Mayan civilization didn't mean the Mayans died. It
Hmm.
just meant that the social system, the social fiber broke down. There was a unilateral collapse, and as a result of that, there was no more Mayan civilization. The Mayans went elsewhere. Same with the Roman civilization. All the Romans didn't die. It's just that the infrastructure that kept the civilization together was no longer valid. There's a case to be made, and as you know, in my first book, The Watchman's Rattle, I make this case. There's a case that there is a way in which a society begins to behave that sets them up and makes them vulnerable for the kind of unilateral collapse that you're speaking of.
Hmm.
And as I went through and studied the Ming Empire, the Egyptian Empire, the Mayans, the Romans, the Khmer, I was not interested in the event which triggered their collapse, because historians have really reviewed that and understood it far better than I do. I was more interested in their behaviors leading up to that cataclysmic event that caused them to collapse.
Yes.
And I found some interesting patterns. And the most profound pattern, which I cover in The Watchman's Rattle, is that the society begins to become too complex for the person on the street to really understand how things are being done. They
Right.
no longer understand how food is being grown. They no longer understand how water is being delivered. They no longer understand the laws of their government. The day-to-day life becomes too complex. And as a result of that, there begins to be a massive confusion between what is an empirical fact and what is just an unproven belief or an opinion. And that's the second phase. So complexity begins to gain in velocity, social complexity. And then the second stage is there's a mass confusion between what is a fact and what is an unproven belief. And then the third phase is that the leaders themselves become confused about facts and unproven beliefs, and public policy begins to become irrational.
Uh-huh.
It's no longer fact-based. Now, I wrote this book 10 years ago. I could not have foreseen the kinds of political events which are going on right now, but a lot of people, that's kind of how I got the label of futurist, I suppose. People said, you just called it. You called the trend, and we can see the trend now, where even our political leaders don't seem to be able to distinguish between a fact and their own beliefs or opinions.
Yes, it's a rabbit hole that goes very deep, isn't it, in terms of the political aspect of it. I also see some wonderful opportunities for predictive algorithms as far as the productions of food and the likes. What's your take on agriculture and aquaculture and all these other I guess super systems that support life? How can we use this wonderful technology there?
Well, of course, as you know, our ability to predict weather patterns has grown geometrically,
Hmm.
which has had a profound impact on being able to give people forewarnings of hurricanes, floods, tsunamis, other kinds of really disastrous weather events. Uh, Last year, the United States launched the GOES satellites, which effectively allowed the resolution and the data that we capture to grow by almost tenfold. So the accuracy in which we can make predictions as to when these events are going to occur has really grown geometrically in just the last 12 to 24 months.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could give people an extra 5 to 10 minutes to respond to a natural disaster, that saves millions and millions of lives. So never mind the amount of weather data now that farmers and people in agriculture, ranchers, are now able to use that are predicting rainfall and dangerous wind conditions and when to get their livestock in. It's interesting that the largest retailer in the United States just a couple of years ago began tapping into NOAA's weather database because they learned that cows produce less milk as temperatures go up. So as they began to see that the temperatures would be rising, they would step in and lock in milk prices ahead of their competitors, which allowed them to always have the lowest milk prices in the marketplace. And so there are some competitive advantages of knowing the relationship between weather and potential shortages. And as a result, a number of the large retailers and particularly commodity investors tend to watch those weather algorithms very closely.
It's never been truer that information is power. That's one thing that's coming to my mind. That's for sure and certain.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have so much data now, but data in and of itself
It's just
doesn't
data.
really do anything
Yeah.
unless there's something actionable. And it used to be that the actionable event was now. You know, you'd have some data and you'd say, okay, I could do this today or tomorrow.
Yeah.
But now there's been a turn that's occurred, and outside of programs like yourself, not many people are really realizing that we can react to events which have not occurred yet, that are increasingly further and further down the road, such as climate change. We're seeing the early effects of climate change, but there's still time to react to the worst effects of climate change, which we know what they are: global burning.
Yeah.
We're just on the cusp of that. So there's still time to act responsibly. It's still anybody's argument as to whether humans can fully affect climate change. We may only be able to partially impact it, even if we went full force at it. Our models are not particularly accurate, as you can tell by the forecasting.
Mm-hmm.
I think Al Gore said, we'd be all burned up 5 years ago.
Oh, was that the inconvenient truth?
Yeah, and the forecasting has not been accurate because the models have not been as accurate as they needed to be. And second of all, we don't have enough historic data to really get as accurate as we need to be. But the one thing we do know is it's occurring.
Yeah.
And the second thing we know is that humans are participating. We can't say humans are responsible, but and we can't say that humans can fix it, because we do not know that. But we do know that we are a participant. Now, we might be participating 1%, 5%, 90%.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fair argument amongst the scientific community, but it's not zero.
No, absolutely not. I occasionally see around the place AI, and I see these robots, and I see some amazing things being done with them. They're opening and closing doors, they're feeding animals, they're doing all sorts of wonderful things. I'd love to talk a little bit about the effect that AI powered robots will have in our future lives. We watch these movies. Would that become reality for us?
Oh, no question about it. I mean, we started in factories. Most large automotive factories and manufacturing factories are populated with more robotics than they are humans. And we see robots beginning to move into healthcare. It's very common for robots to be used for certain types of delicate surgeries now. That's not that unusual. We will increasingly see them creep into homes as well, but in kind of a benign way. I mean, these AI powered speakers like that power Alexa and you can ask anything to. People really rely on those.
Oh, yes.
It's interesting. They just did a survey, and I think it was something in the mid 90% of people actually trust what Alexa says.
It's pretty, I don't know if it's scary or comforting.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm sort of two minds.
Mm.
The fact is that whether we like it or not, humans were flawed by the fact that we suffer from Paleolithic emotions. We're territorial, we get fearful, we get greedy. There's a lot of motives that drive us. And to a certain extent, when you remove all of those Paleolithic emotions and motives, you get kind of a more pure answer that's unbiased, right?
Yeah.
But that depends on the data set itself. If the data set from which we're extracting is biased, then Alexa will be as biased as humans are. And so we have to be careful if you really want to know whether you can trust Alexa, start asking some really bizarre questions.
It comes down to that good data in, good data out, doesn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And this is why the earlier conversation we were having about judges relying on artificial intelligence for how long to detain someone or for sentencing guidelines is rather dangerous because those data sets are biased in and of themselves, right? If you have, let's say, a massive data set of convictions, and that those convictions lean heavily toward people that are people of color.
Yeah.
Then it's going to bias the sentencing against people of color. In other words, whatever bias is there will continue.
Yes. Yeah.
To show itself. So the correcting mechanism really isn't in place. Now, through machine learning and deep learning, it will eventually fix itself, but that's going to take a while. So there are some true ethical and moral issues with relying on AI completely for some of the more serious things like, criminal prosecution. I don't think AI is quite ready for that. I mean, that's not to say it won't be. And it's not to say that it's not better than a judge. We had a situation recently where a judge let a kid go that raped another person or gave him a very light sentence, a few months or something, and claimed he did so because the kid came from a good family. So
Yeah.
even in the judicial system, we see an inconsistency in sentencing, and it's rather disturbing. And so, an argument could be made, it'd be better to have an artificial intelligence unit give the same sentence for the same crimes each and every time.
Yes. I am. You see it all around, these false positives and the decision made by a human being rather than something that's proven algorithmically. I think there's a lot to be improved, isn't there?
There is, but every time we progress, there's always a dark side to our progress. I mean, it's impossible not to look at the negatives of progress. I mean, I tell people that when the Charles Lindbergh first flew the Atlantic, he was the recipient of many peace prizes. People thought if you could shuttle, diplomats and heads of state from country to country very easily across these large oceans, that it would probably broker peace because they could meet in person. Nobody was thinking at the time that those same planes were going to carry bombs across the ocean, and the same could be said for the internet. For all the good it's done, if the internet hadn't been invented, we wouldn't be worried about cyber warfare and shutting down our grid and cybersecurity attacks. We wouldn't have those problems. So there is no such thing as progress without a dark side. And we tend to be very poor about anticipating what that will be, and I don't know why that is. It's very troublesome. It seems to me that the governments of major industrialized countries would confer artificial intelligence groups right now to inform the leadership of what the moral and ethical and legal issues are that these new technologies could bring about. And certainly AI is something that the government should be getting out ahead of, not reacting to the way they did the internet and cybersecurity and cyber warfare. It always seems like the government is just trailing behind where technology is. And I think in the case of artificial intelligence, that's very dangerous.
Yeah, it's a very deep, very expansive topic. I wonder, what are you working on right now, Rebecca, you personally?
Well, I'm actually working on using artificial intelligence to determine whether we can put together a rather primitive algorithm on what makes humans happy.
Oh, very interesting.
Because we have a lot of data about certain circumstances that increase your probability of being a happy, fulfilled human being. And I'm not talking about woo-woo science, incense,
Yeah.
crystal. I don't live in that world.
No.
Yeah, but I'm talking about empirical data
Yep.
that indicates how much money do you need, after which every additional dollar or pound or euro is going to have diminishing returns towards your well-being. Are people with children happier than people that don't have children? Are men happier than women? Are people that live in the country happier than people that live in the city? It turns out that there's a lot of actual very specific data on what makes people increase the probability of being happy, such as what kind of occupation is the happiest and which are the most miserable. And it seems like it's never been compiled into one resource where you could go in and say, if you make all these decisions, you increase your probability of being happy by X%.
Yes, that's just some amazing work, and I look forward to seeing whatever comes out of that stable. I'm sure it's going to be amazing work. Now, when people want to find your books or they want to work with the Costa Group, where are they going to go?
Well, they would go to my website. We have a contact page on my website. And as you know, a lot of videos and a lot of radio programs and information that they can take advantage of. The website is rebeccacosta@yahoo.com. Excuse me. It's rebeccacosta.com.
Now, I've seen the website for everybody who's on the show today is expansive. There's such a great deal of wonderful content on there. I will definitely be making sure to put the URL links around the post no matter where you see this wonderful call today. And with that being said, Rebecca, thank you so very much for spending some time with me on the My Future Business Show today.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the good work you're doing.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the call, then make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, share us with your friends, and book your spot on the show at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. And if you're looking for solutions that will help grow your business, then visit myfuturebusiness.com/shop.